The Relight node, if I pull this out, so this is what the Relight node looks like. It has an input for the color, which would be your render, and it has an input for lights. And if you plug in the color and I pop out the Relight node, it needs normals and it needs positions for it to work efficiently. So if we look at our Zilla render, we don't have any position paths or normals rendered for us. So what I did was I used the Zilla geometry, and using our scanline render, I outputted normals and I outputted position based on the shader output in the scanline render. So I just basically, like our similar previous examples, lectures, I checked on output vectors and I generated positions and normals, and that's what we're seeing represented here. And what I did from there is I copied these passes into our Zilla render. So now if we look at the Zilla render, I've copied the layer normals, and in another copy node, I've copied over the position pass. So now if we look at our Zilla render with these two copy nodes, and we look at the multi-channel EXRs, not only do we have the original passes we previously had, but now we have position, and we also have normals copied into its stream. So those are the key ingredients we need to work with Relight. So as you can see, I've plugged Relight into our render, and now we need some lights. So let's create some lights in 3D here again. So I was thinking what we could do is use the locator from our gunner that we used earlier to do our helicopter relight to position a couple lights over here that could mimic potentially whether it's muzzle flash or a spotlight or something like that, using the Relight node. So let's create ourselves a light. So we'll go light, and right now this light is again at its world space origin. So if I plug the axis, our gunner locator, into the axis of our light, now our light has shifted up in position to match the position of that gunner. And I'm going to expand this light now, and I'm going to change this light type to a spotlight. And we could increase the intensity of this just to see what it's doing, and you could see where it's hitting right now in 3D space. And if I increase the cone angle, we'll get more spread from this light. And if we decrease the penumbra angle, it'll kind of give us more fall off in addition to the cone fall off itself. But we could adjust these parameters soon, shortly, but we could also rotate this light around if we want. And we could also shift it. It's still parented to the gunner locator, but we're just shifting it over a little bit. So let's start with that light for now and see what we get. So let's close that out. So the Relight node, like I mentioned, we've got our render plugged into the color, and then now we're going to plug in the light into its input. And if we view this Relight node, nothing is happening. And the reason is it's got a couple multiple inputs that we need to take care of. So there's an input for our camera, so we'll just plug our render camera into that. So let me move this light over, and I'll plug our camera in. And again, we don't seem to be having anything affected. So if we look again, there's one more input that got generated once we plugged our camera in, and that is a material input. So what we'll do is we'll plug in a basic material into the material input. And now if we look at our relight and we select our normals, and we select our position. Look at that. Now we've got lighting based on our position and our normals. And now we could adjust the light position again if you wanted to. We could change the rotation angle on it. And again, we could change the attenuation on that light and also the fall off on it and spread the cone angle like so. And we could do multiple lights in this scene if we wanted to, like any other circumstances, but for now, that should be good. And what we could do is, looking at our render, what we could do is shuffle out let's do this. What we could do now is shuffle out a couple of our AOVs out of our render. So we could grab our diffuse, duplicate this, and we could grab reflect and duplicate this again, and we'll grab specular. So now we have specular, we have reflect, and we have diffuse. And let me just organize these a little bit. So I'm going to put a couple dots down just so things are nice and clean. And depending on what we're after, we could multiply our Relight node against one of these passes. So we could do multiply merge, and we could take our Relight, put that in the B input, and for now we could take our diffuse and multiply our light against the diffuse, and then we will plus this on top of our original render. So we'll go to operations, plus, and put a dot down too. So now if we look at our raw render and then we look at the output here, you could see what this Relight is doing. We're getting actual shaping based on the normals, and it's enhancing our lighting here. And we could also multiply this against the reflections too, so we could merge these together. So we'll go specular, reflect, clone this again. So now I've got spec and reflect together, and I've got diffuse, and we could multiply our Relight against those three passes. And again, if we view this, it's helping give us some shape here too. I could also balance these out too, so I could bring our diffuse down if we want. Maybe take the diffuse down to like 0.25. And then I could boost up our specular and reflection pass. And now if we multiply these, we're getting a little bit more out of it. So now if we wanted to mimic this as being muzzle flash lighting or something from the helicopter onto our shot, what we could do is adjust our light color. So if you look at the Relight, maybe what we could do is boost up the intensity of the light, and then we could make our light red, bring down the blue so it looks a little bit more like firelight, bring down the green, and see what that looks like multiplied against our passes, and add it on top. So you can see what that's doing now. And then nice thing about this too is, again, we look at our Relight, we could swing our light around again. So we could swing the light depending on where we want it to hit. And also we could increase the intensity if we like. Another thing we could do too is, if we wanted this to mimic flickering, we could use the expression, random expression from our earlier weeks. And what I could do is pop this out. I'll go edit expression, and then we'll say random frame and close the parenthesis out. And if we look at our curve editor, that's what our curve is doing. And we could also spread this out a little bit too. So what I'll do is I'll put, I will put a divide, and we could divide it by 2 just to give it a little bit more smoother flicker. And now if we apply this flicker and we kind of view this relight, let me put a in and out point here. And let's see what that looks like added on top of our render. And what I could do too, just so we could read this a little bit better, I'll just put a multiply node down, just set this to RGB and bring this down to maybe 0.7 so we could bring our main Zilla render down, just so we could kind of see full on what this 3D light relight is doing on our render here. And again, let's flipbook this. So the Relight node is really handy for enhancing what's already there, especially since you have normals that could give definition to the geometry and its shape. So it's a really handy way to be able to use this to do fire interactive light from an explosion or from muzzle flashes and things like that. So, and the nice thing too is we've parented our gunner, our light, to the helicopter locator. So that light's always going to be in the position of our helicopter. So we could similarly have done this where we have taken this relight, and instead of this red light, we could have made it a white spotlight as if it's a helicopter spotlight. So there you have it. That's the Relight node. Again, it takes the color input with positions and normals. It takes a light input. It takes your scene camera, and it uses a basic material too. And again, we could have used this material to bring up diffuse, and we could have used this to bring up specular or decrease specular if we wanted to, and increase the sheen on our renders. So again, we view this now. It's a little bit more broader light. So that's the broad overview of the Relight node. Definitely give it a try and experiment with using it on your renders and future projects. Thanks so much, everyone.